Welkom bij Café Weltschmerz in samenwerking met Viruswaarheid en Voorwaarheid.nu. Dit is in de serie Science Summit Uncensored. En we hebben een hele speciale gast, zoals alle gasten bij deze summit, die niet Nederlands spreekt. Dus de rest van het interview zal in het Engels zijn. Welkom Martin Haditsch.
Thank you very much, Willem, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Finally, we meet in person. We had many Zooms.
Yes.
We discussed a lot of topics, yet I think we have some topics that we didn't cover yet.
Okay.
So first of all, can you give a brief introduction to the people who have not watched our previous interviews?
Well, I'm a medical doctor. I also did studies in biology. I'm specialized in microbiology, virology, infectious epidemiology, tropical diseases, infectious diseases. I'm running a travel medicine center, a small one, in Austria, and I'm heading a quite big laboratory in Hanover in Germany, where we also run some tests.
And we will get to that later on. But it's fair to say that you are quite the expert on numerous fields that are involved in this COVID pandemic.
Yes, because maybe I might add to that, because this is, I think, very important. I also did education 3 years in becoming general practitioner, and this is family doctor. And I think some of the conclusions I draw in the past 2.5 years was out of this perspective, because I thought we have to care for the health of the people, for the well-being of the people, for the well-being of the families, including the children, and not only focus on one agent or one disease.
Yeah, so looking at it much broader, it's also mental health, well-being, not just whether you get infected or not.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved in what we now call the resistance against the measures and also against the pharmaceutical interventions? Because as you said, and we will talk more about that later, you are involved in selling vaccines in your clinic in Austria, and you have a PCR lab in Hanover. So most people would expect that you would be completely in line with the COVID narrative.
Well, you should not expect that, because you see, if you're not only a medical person, if you're a doctor, you've given an oath. And the first oath is nil nocere, don't harm. And I think each and every doctor should adhere to this promise. And based on that, you see, I don't sell vaccines. I apply vaccines whenever it seems to have a good risk-benefit ratio, when people want it. There are only very few mandatory vaccines where people cannot escape. So if you're going to tropical Africa, you need a yellow fever vaccination. But otherwise, people can decide on themselves whether they want or not. And I try just to give all those informations that we can together have something like an informed consent on that. And the other thing is also, if you're doing laboratory tests like we do, I think it's the biggest point is not how you get the specimen, how you work with the specimen, but how do you interpret the result? And therefore, I'm happy to be in the position that maybe, to a certain amount at least, I have some impact on what people do with the tests if they are delivered.
Okay, so you feel that you can still do some good. So let's go into the PCR. You run a very big laboratory in Hanover. What was striking to me when I looked at the Dutch data and the German data is that our summer threshold or our summer baseline in Holland was about 10 times higher than in Germany. And in Germany, there are much more of these big professional non-governmental laboratories. Do you feel that when you do these PCR tests and run the whole assay, that you really stick to the assay as it was meant to be, and that it's a big difference with other institutions?
Frankly spoken, we cannot stick to the rules, because the basic rules are PCR tests are not licensed to test healthy people. But this is not up to us. It was the government, it was the authorities that ordered to have these tests run. And we all know, and this is a very basic principle, which also people watching now this interview could easily imagine. If you have a very low rate of positive results, you just by testing generate a lot of false positive results. So when the endemicity is low, you have a high proportion of false positives. If the endemicity is high, you have, as compared, a quite high likelihood of false negatives. So this lies within the logistics of running tests, and therefore back to your question, we could not escape this kind of a trap that we were ordered to run these tests. And the question which really touched me is, can I do good and can I do bad, or how can I impact that? And just to give an example, you see, if soccer players, if basketball players are only allowed to play and to do what they are meant to do with having a negative test, then the only other option would be don't play. And so it made, from this point of view, it made sense. And the same was also, if I still can recall one very sad situation where the father of a young man had died in Turkey, and he was only allowed to get on the airplane to the burial with a negative test. So yes, we did those tests and we still do those tests, but they are ordered, and it's not, we don't try to get them in, but they are coming in.
Yeah, and that brings you now into a position where you offer the test, but also do a sort of informed consent through the means of these interviews, that you say, well, you can do the test, but if you do not have any symptoms, the test is meaningless. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once again, it's not licensed. It's not licensed to check healthy people. So, you see, if we ran tests on people passing by, whatever it is, we would make people sick just by testing them, because we will find something which is abnormal. But as long as people are healthy, it's not a doctor's duty to make them sick or to make them feel sick. Yeah? We have to check with all our capacities, with all our senses, with all our empathy. We have to check sick people, try to find the diagnosis, and try to treat them as good as we can. This is our duty. It's not our duty to have checkups of healthy people with tools which are not licensed to do that. Of course, we also check healthy people. We do health tests. We try to encourage health or to help them to lead a healthy life. But this is something different. But in this case, people are labeled to have a disease they don't have.
And it's almost turned upside down. I personally underwent this in prison, that because I said I am without symptoms, so there's not a test that you can give me because this test is not licensed. I literally used that argument. And I said, okay, so you refuse the test, then we put COVID-19 on the door of your cell. So it is now that not the test shows that you are contaminated or infected, but you have to prove that you are not.
Yeah.
Which is kind of putting the world upside down.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree, absolutely.
That brings me to the next part, and of course we discussed this in private many times. What is the function of vaccines and first put it very broadly, and then we zoom in into these injections that are called vaccines.
Which are no vaccines.
Which are no vaccines.
That's important. You see, when I give presentations on vaccinology, usually one of my first slides is telling people there are 3 major contributing factors which doubled the life expectancy in the past 200 years. Number 1, enough food. Number 2, clean water. Number 3, vaccines. But vaccines still are medical interventions, and you have to judge on the necessity, whether it's necessary that you apply this kind of medicine or not. We don't see small children suffocating, for instance, from Haemophilus B infection anymore. Because Haemophilus B used to be a trigger for a very severe infectious disease which killed babies. And since we have the vaccine, these cases have vanished. And this is true for many other diseases as well. I mean, smallpox is the best example for this, which was eradicated in the year of, or it was declared eradicated in the year of 1980. But of course, it's a medical intervention. You always have to check what is the benefit and what is the risk, which is mandatory in each and every medical intervention you do.
And which is not the same for every age group or every segment
of course not. Of course not. You see, the primary goal of a vaccine is to change the immune system in a way that you have something like a training for immune system with, I would say, an agent that looks like an enemy, that helps you to recognize it, that helps you, that shows you the tricks, yeah? How to fight it, and in case of, you are prepared. That's the basic. We know that there have been vaccines which were, as compared to actual vaccines, quite dangerous. There were vaccines which were quite ineffective. And so it should always be decided on, I would say, on a personal judgment, despite the fact that in the past, and in the past, I mean the era before COVID-19, there were also on a consent some basic vaccination schedules where we already know, or we tended to know, that the benefit is higher than the risk. But even then, you see, if you have allergies or whatever, you have to check it and say, in this very special case, I would not take this vaccine, because if you're allergic, you're running the risk of a severe reaction. So it's not justified that we apply this kind of vaccine. And we also have to keep in mind, and this was abused in the discussion with the jabs now against COVID-19, that with some of the products we can produce herd immunity. So there is also the principle of altruism. So if you have a certain amount of the population vaccinated against a certain disease, the others who cannot be vaccinated, or if they are vaccinated, they cannot build up immunity, are protected too, which is a nice idea. But it does not work in those jabs against COVID-19. So this was abused here, and this also leads to the reaction of an increasing part of the population that they don't believe in any vaccines anymore.
Which is a loss to medical science and to humanity, as we can hear, because they can add something when applied well. So if I can summarize, vaccinating a person is always between the patient and the doctor, and is an individual choice, and should not be interfered with or to by the government. And if it is applied incorrectly, then it can do more harm than good.
Yeah.
Not only for the individual, but for the bigger group. Do you feel that we see that now? Because we have rolled out what they call vaccines, and I have a feeling that many more people are not fit, are going from infection to infection. Is there something that you, even when you would use a normal vaccine, could harm society if you do it en masse instead of always looking at the patient, whether there is a positive benefit to risk ratio?
Well, I have to admit, never ever I tried to learn so much on such a narrow item like SARS-CoV-2 infection. It's not even all the corona infections. We don't talk about NL63 and HKU1 and the others, trivial corona, and we don't talk about SARS-CoV-1 and we don't talk about MERS-CoV. We just talk about SARS-CoV-2 and a disease that is linked to that. And I never ever learned that much about one certain disease, not even in the times when there was HIV, and not even on the borreliosis, which is big, but this was not as intense as it is now. And you see the jabs, of course, they added to knowledge. And if you try to get, especially to the raw data, not even what is published, because we know that there are some parties who want to impact what is published. Yeah, but if you get to the raw data, you see, and then you can also prove, and this is also the reason why I call this not vaccinating but spiking, yeah, and why I don't call these products vaccines, because they are not. And they impact the immune system also in a way which is priming the body for further infections. And this is something which is really weird. And I think we have always to consider that if we try to find maybe stratified people who might benefit from these shots, because I think it was published recently that the only group that might benefit from these COVID shots, yeah, are people older than 85 or 90. Yeah? And all the others, in the balance of risk and benefit, they have more risk than benefit.
Have you ever seen such a benefit-risk ratio in any other medical product? Well,
of course you see this, for instance, if you're treating cancer patients, but this is a wholly different picture, you see. Here we have, at the beginning, 100% healthy people. And the risk of dying is actually with Omicron 0.07%. I think that's roughly the figure we have. In the other case, we have a cancer where the likelihood of dying is roughly 100%, and this within the next months or at least few years. And then if you apply a drug which has even severe side effects, you will anyhow have, if it's only partly working, you will have a substantial impact on the survival rate. This is wholly different. But yes, we see this also in other drugs, but this is not in other prevention methods or whatever.
So what is the way forward? Because I think the trust in public health is crumbling. I expect the vaccine programs to collapse, because a lot of people don't want any jab anymore. The people who are pushing this agenda that everything has to be mRNA programmable drugs, so to say, want to go one way, and now a large part of society wants to go another way. How can we bridge it? Can we bring it together, or is the breakdown of trust too big already?
That's a very complex question. I mean, I also can testify, and even in those people who are now attending my office, that there is an increasing amount of distrust in traditional vaccines, because, and we will have to look into that, people are sensitized and they say, well, how can you safeguard that those traditional products are not changed in a way under the same label, with the same name in future? So how can you make sure that it's only in what is said to be in? And I would say this is a challenge. And the other thing is that a lot of these people had their bad experiences themselves or in their close friendships, family, whatever. And you see, if you're personally affected, this has huge impact on your future decisions. You know, those people who were involved in a car crash, you can always tell them these are safe cars, but they will have something like a trauma, and they won't get into a car as easily as it was before. And this is a big challenge. But please just let me briefly focus on something which is only rarely mentioned. You see, we always talk about injecting some substances and maybe the adverse reactions and the bad side effects and whatever. But what, out from my perspective or perception, is not mirrored in a correct way is, and if these substances are injected, and if I somehow stimulate my immune system to produce antibodies and to prime cells, defensive cells out of the immune system, what will they do? You see? And we've seen now that even the European Medical Agency forced an inactivated vaccine producer to include myocarditis and pericarditis in labeling their product.
And then we're talking about the Novavax.
And this, Novavax. And this is no mRNA. And this is due to the effects that the body makes on the injection. Yeah. So the Novavax actually, if you compare it, one could say this is it follows the principles of a traditional vaccine. The production process is a little bit different, but it's an inactivated vaccine where you administer a certain amount of spike antigen into the body, and the immune system produces antibodies, and based on the cellular immunity, also killer cells or whatever. Yeah, so this is traditional, but we have to consider also that your immune system is something that is highly active, and if you trigger it in the wrong way, you need a minesweeper, because it might blow you up. And I think this is not mentioned adequately, because always there's the focus only on what is injected and not what does the body do with it.
As a reaction to it.
As a reaction.
So that the spike actually works as a super allergen.
Yeah, it is. It's not only that. We also know, you see, an allergen provokes an immunologic response, but the spike antigen also is toxic.
Yes.
It's not only allergic; it's also toxic. So it's one of the real dangerous substances we have. And if you provoke via injection, that your body produces spike protein by him or herself, this is some kind of self-intoxication. And this is dangerous. Yeah, because you don't know which amount for which time in which cells. So it's these are all open questions, and I doubt that even with completing phase 3 of the studies, I mean which is still ongoing. Which is still ongoing. So we are still in a study phase, and it's not the regular licensing which is done with other products. Yeah, I doubt that we will find all this out because it's so complex.
That brings me to a side topic, or actually an extension of this. You mentioned that people don't really trust what is in the vaccine anymore. Does it contain what is printed on the vial? And then I'm looking particularly at the measles injection. So last year I looked in the database and I saw that this group in Switzerland, Germany, and the group in North Carolina, BERC, have made a chimera. So a measles body with the genetic code of the SARS-CoV-2 spike in it. And I'm also looking at legislation. As you know, we do many court cases. And at the same time in the United States and Germany, they now mandated that people who work in childcare have to have a measles injection. Measles has been in the program for a very long time, but if they supplant that original measles with this new hybrid SARS-CoV-2 measles, then we could see self-spreading vaccines, as they would call it. Do you feel that that could be the case and that all these worries of people are justified?
Of course, the worries are justified because you should never open the box of Pandora. And you see, you should really you should have very, very substantial facts and very strong data at hand if you're trying a wholly new platform to produce something which, I want to mention it again, should be used in healthy people. Yeah, we are not forced to apply something to save a life quickly, because if it's a life-saving drug, as many others. I mean, we know that each and every body it's a tragedy, but it's true. Each and every person that is born someday will die. That's the natural cycle. And I wonder what is the focus if you try to implement substances like that, because you won't be able to provide endless life. Mm-hmm. It's not possible. And if you, as you gave the example, if you start to mix up certain substances, and especially if you're working with life-attenuated vaccines, which is the measles vaccine, for example, yeah, then you really have to make sure that you don't harm the persons, because the measles vaccines themselves, amongst all the vaccines you have, as they are life-attenuated vaccines, they already have more contraindications as compared to inactivated vaccines. For instance, immunosuppression. Yeah? And we know that increasingly people, not only but predominantly out of the what we call the rheumatoid group of patients, they now take immunomodulating substances, biologicals, and they interfere with the immune system. And some of those interfere in a kind and in an amount that you should not give life-attenuated vaccines because they might even kill the person because they are live, they are attenuated, so a normal immune system can fight those vaccines. But if you're immunocompromised, you might suffer severe disease or even death if you get these kind of substances applied into your body. So this is per se a model that needs to be somehow monitored. But if you combine this, then even more. And I mean, we are already working with these kind of chimeric vaccines because the so-called vector-based vaccines, they are chimeric. I mean, then you have adenovirus, yeah, that is in some kind of a preparation so that it then produces spike protein, but it's chimeric as well. And we've seen the results.
Exactly. I think a lot of people remember the contraindications or the side effects of the clothing in the Astra, but also the Johnson & Johnson. And particularly in Holland, we had a shedding event. It was dansen with Janssen, meaning that young people were lured to take just one shot because you had to have only one shot instead of two. And then the next day you could go to the club to dance. And we saw a very steep spike, which went up and down. And that showed to me that it was not an epidemiological outbreak, but really an artificial one. Mm-hmm, so a part of those people will integrate it and start spreading it. Now, adeno is comparable, the infectiveness with coronaviruses, but measles would be much higher in that case. So you could really start to get self-spreading vaccines. And I'm not saying we are seeing that, but as you mentioned, if we don't look at it very carefully and go through all the trials, it might happen.
Yeah, but you see, I think still we should not be monofocal on one product. Let's say that we now say, let's forget about adenovirus and mRNA because we now have this kind of chimeric vaccine which produces spike based on a measles vector, something like that. You see, because, I mean, the adenovirus that is chosen to be the vector for these kind of vaccines per se is a DNA virus. So adenovirus DNA could be incorporated in human DNA without needing an additional enzyme you need for RNA to be incorporated into DNA. And if you ask me, well, is this only theoretical? I must say no. There were investigations at the beginning of this century, and they have proven that adenoviral vector, DNA, was incorporated in cell DNA with a likelihood, I think it was 0.1 to 0.001% of the cells. So this is not little, this is considerable. And we have to watch these phenomena.
Especially when you inject a very large group, then there will be a few people.
And especially if when you know that there are other adenovirus types that produce cancer. Yeah. So you see, if you have a small dog that is only barking and you have it within the fence and so on, you might say that's not dangerous. So dogs are not dangerous. But when it's a big dog and it's out of the fence and you know that it just grew up and the door was open, then I would say I would not trust the small dog and say, no problem, we can keep the gate open and okay, if it feeds, it gets bigger, it won't harm you. I'm not so sure. Yeah.
So I hear a lot of sense, but I also hear that you are very critical on the narrative. How is it possible that you're still in place, that you can still run your labs, and that even Red Bull has given you a position where you could travel the world and interview a lot of people? They really stood by you and you were able to make a lot of critical documentaries.
Well, these are two questions that must be answered separately. The one thing is the working place. I'm very grateful for the company that employed me and that really did not interfere with my actions, which is also some kind of respect, I would say. Because of course it's not easy. I mean, I was even asked. On the one hand, I was even attacked on that because on the one hand, you blame PCR not to be a good test, and on the other hand, you make money out of it, which is not true because I'm employed, so I don't get paid by the amount of tests we are running. But I'm very grateful that I still can do my job because I love my job, and it's really an amazing thing. The other thing is Red Bull. And I also want to express my deep gratitude, not only to Red Bull, but also to movie media, because you see, Red Bull did finance the whole project, but it was run by movie media. And they asked me whether I'm willing to do these kind of interviews. And the background is that Red Bull Media, they have a broadcasting corporation that serves the German-speaking area, Austria, Germany, and also, as far as I know, a little bit of Switzerland. But they have a very unique situation. As you know, Red Bull, they make substantial amount of money, and they don't depend on the Austrian government to get financial support. And this makes them free to choose whatever they want to do. I mean, of course they get under attack as well, yeah, which is quite logical, because if you're against the mass media and the mainstream, and if you also get increasingly attractive for the people watching TV, because I know many people that say, well, yeah, I'm still watching Austrian television, but when it comes to news or whatever, I switch the channel. I can't hear that anymore. In terms of news, I go and check Servus TV, and then they see what is there, also the documentaries and whatever. And so the mass media, they have lost a substantial group of clients. Yeah, but you see, I think under the bottom line, truth will prevail, and this, of course, makes Red Bull Media playing the strong cards, and they are getting increasingly stronger by time, because as we can see, so many things that were covered up by mass media in the past 2 years, they get into the open. It can't be blocked out, and therefore you see the question is, who is on the winner's side, who is on the loser's side, and as by now I think there is some combination in between winner and truth, and so if I had to bet, my decision was quite clear. Yeah.
Okay, so that's already towards the next question. And I feel that you're quite positive about it, but correct me if I'm wrong. What do you see in the future, in the near future, and our way forward?
I don't have a crystal ball. That's the problem, and I think nobody has. The real problem is, if I had a wish, yeah, I would try to appeal on the code of ethics in journalism. I think the media, they know that they are mighty, but they are the ones who could make a change. Because you see, actually, it's the media which are partially even driven, and we know that, by governments and by other institutions which are close to the mainstream. And they I think I have the feeling sometimes they didn't even dare to get out of this track because they feared that they would lose money by advertisements or whatever. But now I have the feeling that even some of the mass media, they, whatever the reason might be, they don't cover up the bad things completely anymore. So you see, truth lurks out a little bit, yeah, and it gets more. And I know, with the help of the media, and I know that there are also people working in mass media suffering from the actual situation because they say, I can't help. I mean, if I argue differently, I lose my job. Yeah, but if I think if these people could bring media back on what we call on an ethical behavior and to promote what is close to the truth, then you see they would then drive the politicians, the mainstream doctors, or the others who are pushing in this very direction, and this would have huge impact. And you see, I already in the private talk I said, the question is, on which side of the river are you? Yeah, and now those who are closer to the truth see or recognize, and maybe they are also happy about the fact that they obviously chose the right side of the river. And the others, I think they, some of those tend to get to the right side. And as I also told you, I think we should reach out for those, and we should help to build bridges and to get back to a good form of societies and of neighborhood and of friendship and even the families. It's a difficult task, but with the help of the media, it's possible. With the help of the mass media, if there is no help, I think it will also flip, yeah, and we almost reached the tipping point, yeah. Mm-hmm. But it will take longer, and we will have far more to sacrifice in this interval of time.
Thank you very much. It was great to have you here, finally.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Willem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deze video is mogelijk gemaakt door